They called it the wedding of the century. Every seat in the cathedral was filled with people who had once pretended to admire me, smiling faces hiding gossiping tongues. The aisle was a river of white lilies, so heavy with fragrance, I thought I might choke on them. But I didn't. I stood there in my gown, heart hammering in my ribcage, like it wanted to tear itself free. It wasn't nerves. It was instinct. Some buried part of me already knew I was walking into my own execution. The gilded doors at the end of the aisle swung open. Sunlight poured across the marble floor in a blinding flood. And there he was, Damien, my groom, my first love, my greatest mistake. He looked exactly as I'd always remembered him. Black hair slicked back, jaw tight, eyes sharp as broken glass. Except this time, he didn't look at me. He didn't even spare me a passing glance. Instead, he turned, extended his hand, and my stepsister, Clarissa, emerged from behind him, draped in a shimmering gown of silver. The hush that fell over the hall was suffocating. I heard a collective intake of breath, as if everyone needed to feel the drama of my humiliation pressing against their ribs. Damien's voice cut through the silence, cruel and clear. I will not marry this woman. He pointed to me as if I were some parasite he discovered clinging to his boot. Today I marry Clarissa Whitmore, the only woman worthy of my name. There was a beat of stunned quiet. Then the whispers began. 1,000 little knives sinking into my skin. She must have known. How pathetic. After all that, she still thought he'd choose her? I felt nothing. No tears, no rage, just a cold, almost fascinated detachment. I looked at Clarissa, who smirked at me from the crook of Damien's arm, her expression triumphant. She had always been the pretty one. The clever one. The perfect little snake who wrapped herself around my life until I couldn't tell where my dreams ended and her poison began. I wondered, distantly, how long they'd planned this. How many nights they'd spent laughing over my gullibility. How satisfying it must have been to watch me pour my love into Damien, never suspecting he would offer my ring to her instead. My father stepped forward, his face dark with fury, not for the disgrace I suffered, but for the embarrassment it brought him. Do not make a scene, he hissed, his hand locking around my arm in a bruising grip. You will stand here and smile. But I didn't. Instead, I lifted my chin and looked directly into Damien's eyes. I see, I said calmly. My voice didn't tremble. Then I wish you both all the happiness you deserve. Before anyone could stop me, I turned and walked out of the cathedral. My gown dragged behind me, collecting dust and petals, and for one delirious moment, I thought I might be free. But life is never so kind. Hours later, I was back in the house I'd grown up in, a gilded cage stuffed with expensive lies. My father stormed in, roaring about scandal and ruined reputations, about how I would apologize and make amends. Clarissa stood behind him, crocodile tears in her eyes. Damien was nowhere to be seen. I refused to cry, even when my father struck me across the face. Even when Clarissa pretended to plead for me. Even when my father locked me in my bedroom and declared I would remain there until I repented. That night, I lay on my bed, the satin sheets cool against my skin. My cheek throbbed where he'd hit me. Somewhere in the house, I heard Clarissa laughing. And for the first time, something inside me cracked open. I realized I had wasted my life trying to win the love of people who had never valued me. And as that understanding sank in, it was almost a relief. Because if nothing I did would ever be enough, then I was finally free to stop trying. When dawn crept over the horizon, pale and relentless, my heart gave out. It didn't feel like dying. It felt like slipping into a silence I had yearned for all my life. My last thought was simple, and it burned brighter than any of my regrets. If I had the chance to do it again, I wouldn't stand there waiting. I would leave first. And then, darkness. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with me. I didn't expect to wake again. Certainly not like this, gasping, my lungs desperate for air, my skin slick with cold sweat. My eyes flew open to the familiar canopy of the bridal chamber, white silk fluttering in the draft. For a moment, I thought I was trapped in some cruel afterlife, doomed to relive my humiliation on an endless loop. But then my gaze shifted to the clock on the carved mantelpiece. 6:30 in the morning. The wedding was hours away. I bolted upright, pressing a hand to my chest. My heart thundered, not weak and failing like the night I died, but strong, alive. Slowly, mechanically, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The mirror across the room showed my face, pale, wide-eyed, unbruised. My cheek was smooth, unmarked by my father's slap. My hair, dark as ink, was still arranged in neat waves. It was real. I was alive. Alive, and reborn on the very day that had destroyed me. A sharp, electric calm settled into my bones. No panique.
No histeria.
Only the understanding that I had been given something most people never received, a second chance. And I would not waste it. A soft knock startled me. The door creaked open, and Clarissa poked her head in, all sweetness and false concern. Oh, good, you're awake. Father wanted to be sure you were preparing. Today is so important. Her voice was syrupy, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. She must have been gloating already, eager for the scene she and Damien would orchestrate later. I forced my expression into something docile, nodding as though I hadn't seen behind her mask. Thank you, I murmured. I'll be ready. She smiled, satisfied.
Good.
You always were the obedient one. When she left, I shut the door and locked it behind her. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. All that fear and shame had died with the girl I used to be. This time, they would not get the spectacle they were hoping for. I turned to the writing desk, the ink pot still sealed, the parchment waiting. As I pulled out a sheet, a strange, giddy exhilaration fluttered through me. If they wanted scandal, so be it. But it would be on my terms. I dipped the pen and began to write. Each stroke carved away another piece of my old self. To my esteemed father, my beloved sister, and the man I was to wed. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I didn't pause. The words poured out, clean and certain. You have spent years weaving your schemes, measuring my worth by what you could take from me. But I have seen the truth. You deserve each other. You deserve the ruin that will follow this day. I wrote down every secret I had once been too afraid to voice. Clarissa's years-long affair with Damien, begun long before he proposed to me. Their plans to forge my signature on the transfer of my inheritance. The bribes my father paid to keep the authorities silent. I detailed names, dates, evidence, everything they thought was buried too deep to ever be found. When I was finished, I signed my name with a flourish. No trembling hand. No hesitation. I folded the letter and pressed my seal into the wax. The symbol of the Whitmore family, an emblem they would soon learn to regret ever branding me with. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. Pink and gold stained the sky, as if the world itself were applauding my decision to walk away. I stripped off the wedding gown draped across the dressing screen. The satin was heavy, suffocating, like every expectation that had been forced onto my shoulders. I folded it carefully and set it on the bed, the empty sleeves as limp and lifeless as the girl I used to be. In its place, I donned simple riding clothes. Black trousers, a cream blouse, a dark cloak that would hide me well enough. My hair I twisted into a tight knot, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw not a bride, but a woman who would never again be caged by anyone's design. My bag was already packed, gold coins I had hidden away over the years, a forged identity card, and the deeds to a small property far from this cursed estate. At precisely 7:30, the servant Clarissa always sent to check on me would arrive. I had exactly an hour. I tied the bag across my shoulders, took one last look at the letter on the desk, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. Let them search for me. Let them rage and wail and drown in the filth of their own secrets. This time, I was leaving first, and I would never look back. The manor's back corridors were empty, as I knew they would be. Servants never passed this way so early. I slipped along the walls, my boots silent on the polished floors, the cloak swallowing me in its folds. When I reached the servants' entrance, I paused, listening.
No footsteps. No voices.
Only the hush before the storm that would break the moment someone read my letter. I pulled open the door. The morning air was crisp, cool against my flushed skin. Beyond the kitchen gardens, the stable yard waited, a single horse saddled and ready, because I had arranged it. Years before, I'd learned that if I ever needed to disappear, there were ways. The coins could buy anything, loyalty, silence, a swift escape. And so I found the stable boy I had once saved from being dismissed over a broken lantern. His gratitude had been genuine. When I slipped him a purse and told him to prepare a horse and look the other way, he didn't ask questions. The mare stood waiting, stamping softly. A sturdy bay, not fine enough to be recognized from the main stable.
Perfect.
I patted her neck, swung into the saddle, and turned her toward the orchard gate. Behind me, the manor was waking. Light bloomed in windows, shadows moved in the halls. But no one looked out to the orchard. No one imagined the bride would flee before breakfast. I nudged the mare into a trot, and the trees swallowed us. By the time the sun was fully risen, I was miles away. I did not look back. 3 hours later, in the manor I had left behind, a footman knocked on my chamber door, expecting to find me dressing. When no answer came, he called out, voice trembling. Still nothing. He tried the handle.
Locked.
Panic flickered in his eyes as he fetched the housekeeper, who fetched Clarissa, who fetched my father. A cascade of alarm rising through the halls. Clarissa was the one who finally forced the door open. She swept into the room in a rustle of pale silk, her mouth twisted in irritation, ready to scold me for some petty defiance. But the sight that met her was not defiance. It was absence. The bed was empty, the gown folded neatly, and on the writing desk, sealed with the Whitmore crest, my letter waited like a coiled serpent. Clarissa's face went white as wax. She lunged for it, tearing the seal open with shaking fingers. Her eyes flicked over the first lines, then darted to my father's, wild and uncomprehending. "She's gone," she whispered. "She's really gone." My father snatched the letter from her and read. His jaw clenched so hard the veins in his neck stood out. "Find her," he ordered, voice thick with fury. "Find her now." But even as servants scattered to obey, his gaze shifted to Clarissa. He read further and color drained from his cheeks. The words laid out every crime they'd plotted, every theft, every deceit, signed in my steady hand. A testament, a confession, a promise that their empire of pretense would crumble. Clarissa stumbled back a step. "She's bluffing. She must be." "She is not bluffing," my father growled. He crushed the letter in his fist, though it would not stop the truth from spreading.
"Get dressed."
"We must." But he never finished that sentence, because word was already rippling through the house. Whispers that reached the servants, who would carry them beyond these walls by dusk. The Whitmore's perfect facade was cracking, and there was no sealing it again. By then, I was miles away on a narrow road skirting the cliffs. Below, the sea glimmered, bright as poured silver. The wind carried the salt up to sting my lips, and I breathed it in like freedom itself. I stopped the mare and looked back, though I could no longer see the manor or the people in it. Only the horizon stretched behind me, endless and clean. This was the life I had been too afraid to choose before. A life without gilded cages, without begging for crumbs of affection. I thought of Damien, how he would arrive at the wedding hall expecting me to stand there, humiliated and meek, waiting to be discarded. The thrill that shivered down my spine was almost too sharp to bear. Let him search. Let him rage. They would never find me, not until I decided they should. I adjusted the reins and set the mare into a gallop. Wind tore through my hair, and my laughter was carried out over the cliffs. I had left first, and no one would ever make me regret it. By mid-morning, the cathedral was buzzing with speculation. The guests filed in wearing their most extravagant finery, pearls glinting, fans fluttering to hide eager whispers. Everyone adored a scandal, especially if it happened to someone else. Damien arrived at the steps, tall and polished in his dark suit, the image of a perfect groom. But his eyes were hard, scanning the crowd for my father or Clarissa. He expected confirmation that the humiliating finale of his scheme was about to unfold. Instead, he was greeted by the bishop, looking deeply unsettled, and the captain of the Whitmore Guards. Damien's jaw flexed. "Where is she?" The captain shifted uneasily. "My lord, Lady Whitmore is missing." A hush fell over the men within earshot. Damien's gaze went cold and flat. "Missing? She left a letter," the captain said, voice nearly cracking. She's gone." Clarissa came sweeping up the steps then, face pale beneath her artfully arranged hair. When she caught Damien's eyes, she tried for a smile, but it looked brittle. "Surely it's just nerves. She's always been fragile." "Don't," Damien snapped. His temper was usually so carefully hidden, but now it flared for all to see. "Don't pretend this is anything but your doing." Clarissa recoiled. "My doing?" He turned on her, voice low and vicious. "You were supposed to keep her compliant. You swore you could control her." "She was controlled," Clarissa hissed, "until you decided you needed your performance." The bishop, wide-eyed, tried to intervene. "My lords, my ladies, this is hardly the place." But no one listened. A murmur rose among the guests as word trickled out, first as a rumor, then as certainty. The bride has disappeared. An hour later, when my father finally arrived, his face was thundercloud dark. He strode up the aisle, scanning every pew, as if hoping to see me trembling there after all. Instead, a footman scurried to his side and pressed the letter I had left in my chamber into his hand. He read it, his lips compressed into a thin, bloodless line. And then, because some instincts are stronger than pride, he crumpled the letter and tried to slip it into his pocket. But Clarissa lunged for it, yanking it free. The wax seal had broken when he crushed it, and the parchment unfurled like a banner of war. The first lines were read aloud by a voice I would have recognized anywhere, my cousin Margaret, whose curiosity outweighed her discretion. "To my esteemed father, my beloved sister, and the man I was to wed, by the time you read this, I will be gone." The cathedral seemed to inhale all at once. Margaret's voice trembled as she read on, each revelation more damning than the last. The affair Clarissa had denied with every breath. The plan to steal my inheritance. The bribes. The forgeries. The years of deceit. By the time she finished, no one was pretending to look away. No one was pretending this was a misunderstanding. Clarissa's face was white as linen. My father's hands shook where they gripped the pew. Damien stood stone still, though a vein throbbed at his temple. For a heartbeat, no one dared move. And then the whispers began, soft, horrified, unstoppable. She knew. All along she knew. She left them to rot. My father turned on Clarissa. You swore you handled this. She's lying. Clarissa screamed, but her voice cracked. She's lying. Damien closed his eyes, and for the first time since I had ever known him, he looked defeated. It was beautiful. Far down the coast, in a small, wind-battered tavern, I sipped lukewarm tea and listened to the tide. The old innkeeper didn't know my name. To her, I was just a traveler with coin in her purse and a hunger for solitude. She brought me a plate of bread and cheese and asked no questions. I liked her immediately. I had no illusions that this peace would last forever. Damien would hunt for me. My father would rage. Clarissa would descend into panic.
Let them.
I had no intention of cowering in their shadows again. As evening crept in, I took out the small ledger I'd hidden in my cloak. The pages held account numbers, investments I'd made under an assumed name, enough money to start over anywhere I wished. And beyond that, a plan. Because if I was reborn, it was not simply to escape. It was to reclaim every piece of my life they had stolen, and to watch them discover how it felt to be powerless. Tomorrow, I would ride farther south to the port. I would take passage to the coast where no one knew the name Whitmore. And when I returned, because I would not come back as a bride. I would come back as their reckoning. 3 days later, I stood on the deck of a merchant ship bound for Harrowport, the wind tangling my hair as the coastline of my past life shrank into the horizon. The morning I arrived in the harbor was gray and cold, the docks alive with shouting sailors and gulls wheeling overhead. I stepped off the gangplank carrying nothing but a worn leather satchel and a name no one could trace.
Elena Morrigan.
It was a name I had once read in an old novel, the heroine who slipped through every net her enemies cast for her. It felt fitting. The clerk at the registry office glanced at my forged papers and then at me, brow furrowed. You traveling alone? Yes, I said evenly. My parents died in the fever. There is no one else. He nodded, accepting the story without question. Gold has a way of smoothing over any doubt. I signed the ledger in a steady hand.
Elena Morrigan.
Independent.
Free.
By nightfall, I was settled in a modest boarding house run by a widow with gentle eyes and no curiosity. My room was small, with a single window overlooking the rooftops, but the first time I locked the door from the inside, I felt safer than I ever had in the manor I left behind. I lit the oil lamp and spread my ledger on the bed. Page after page of neat columns, evidence of every quiet investment, every parcel of land I had bought in secret. Years ago, I thought I was simply preparing for the day my father decided to cut me off. But perhaps even then, some part of me had known I would need a way to vanish. I flipped to the last page and touched the total at the bottom. Enough to build a new life. Enough to fund my return when the time was right. But not yet. For now, I needed to grow this fortune into something they couldn't ignore. I began by visiting a discreet broker's office tucked between a dressmaker and a cobbler. The broker was a lean, silver-haired man who conducted business with no questions, provided you paid his fee. He studied my papers and looked up, curiosity flickering in his gray eyes. You wish to purchase shares in the Whitmore shipping interests? Yes, I said, unflinching. Quietly. He tilted his head. It will take time to acquire enough to matter. I'm patient, I told him. And I was. I had waited an entire lifetime already. While the broker set the wheels in motion, I spent my days studying ledgers, learning the finer details of trade routes and port tariffs. I would not simply take back what they stole. I would learn to wield it better than they ever had. Each evening, I returned to my little room, tired but satisfied. I was no longer the girl waiting in silk for her doom. I was Elena Morgan, architect of her own deliverance. And every day, news reached the port from the capital.
Skandal.
The Whitmore family under scrutiny. Rumors that the bride had run away because she had learned too much. Rumors that she had died. Rumors that she had married a secret lover in another country. I smiled when I heard them. Let them spin their tales. The truth would only become more dangerous the longer they remained ignorant of it. On the 10th day of my new life, I received a letter from the broker, delivered in a plain envelope with no seal. Madam, I have begun acquiring your desired shares. Discreetly. It will not be traced to you. Respectfully, Farron and Company. I read it twice, savoring the quiet satisfaction. This was how you dismantled an empire, not with loud declarations, but with the patient erosion of everything your enemies believed was secure. I spent that evening in the boarding house parlor, pretending to read while the other tenants whispered about the Whitmores. Her father's debt is mounting, the widow murmured to her cousin. I heard the king's auditors are involved. Serves them right, the cousin sniffed. I never trusted that family. Too polished by half. I sipped my tea, fighting back a smile. In the old life, their cruelty had felt inescapable. But in this one, they were already unraveling, and I hadn't even begun in earnest. That night, I slept deeply. No nightmares. No visions of the cathedral or Clarissa's triumphant smirk. Only one thought echoed in my dreams. When I return, it will be on my terms. In Harrowport, the days began to slip by with a quiet, determined rhythm. Every morning, I rose before dawn, reviewed my investments, and walked the docks with my hood drawn low. No one spared me more than a glance. I was invisible, precisely as I intended. Yet, as invisible as I had become, the same could not be said for my absence. It started with the broadsheets. Headlines proclaiming the scandal in block letters. Heiress vanishes on wedding day. Whitmore's under investigation for fraud. The runaway bride or the reckoning. Each time I passed the newsstands, I paused to watch people reading them. The fishermen, the dock workers, the merchants. None of them knew they were standing beside the woman everyone speculated about. When dusk fell, I would slip back to the boarding house and light a candle over my maps. Slowly, carefully, I charted the web of companies my father controlled. I traced every route his ship sailed, every warehouse, every proxy owner. With each connection I uncovered, I felt something unfurl in my chest, satisfaction, crisp and clean as winter air. Because while they searched for me, I was already reaching into the heart of what they valued most. A week after my arrival in Harrowport, the first rumors of the search reached me. They say Damien Whitmore hired bounty hunters, the widow told her neighbor over the fence. Claims she's been kidnapped. Her cousin sniffed. More like she finally came to her senses. I stood in the garden, pretending to pick herbs while I listened. Inside, a quiet thrill lit through me. Let Damien spin his stories. Let him send his hired hounds across the countryside. They would never look here, never imagine I had walked away with my head high and my hands clean. On the 12th day, as I returned from the broker's office, I caught sight of a familiar carriage in the harbor square, a sleek black one with a crest on the door. The Whitmore crest. For an instant my pulse jumped. But then I stepped into the doorway of the apothecary and watched from the shadows. Two men emerged, Damien's guards. They questioned the dockmaster, voices low and urgent. The dockmaster shook his head. The guards moved on to the next stall. I stayed motionless, heart steadying again. They were searching, and they were already too late. That evening, I opened the ledger from my broker. A new entry gleamed in fresh ink. Acquisition complete. 13% stake in Whitmore Shipping and Trade. I ran my fingertip over the words. 13% was nothing to the uninitiated. To me, it was leverage, influence, the first crack in the foundation they had built on my silence. I closed the book and leaned back in my chair, letting the hush of the boarding house fill the space around me. For the first time, I thought of my mother. She had died when I was young, too young to understand why her absence made the air in our house feel so thin. In my memories, she was always gentle hands and soft words. Would she have been proud to see me now? Or frightened by what I had become? The question drifted through my thoughts, but I didn't linger on it. I could not afford to mourn shadows. 3 days later, the widow knocked on my door. When I opened it, she held out a folded scrap of parchment. A man came asking if I'd seen you, she said quietly. Described you perfectly, except he called you by another name. My heart did not leap or falter. It settled deeper into the resolve I wore like armor. Thank you, I said, taking the note. It was a single sentence, written in a familiar hand, one I had learned to read in secret business contracts. Damien's. Come home, and this will all be forgiven. I read it once. Then I tore it in two, walked to the hearth, and dropped the pieces into the flames. I watched them curl and blacken until there was nothing left but ash. That night, as the tide pounded the shore, I sat by the window, pen in hand. I began a letter addressed to the authorities in the capital, anonymously, of course. In it, I described the hidden ledgers in my father's study. The bribes, the stolen funds, the illegal shipments. I enclosed enough detail to spark an inquiry that would take them years to extinguish. When I finished, I folded the letter and sealed it with a wax stamp, one that bore no crest, only a blank circle. I felt no triumph.
No regret.
Only certainty. The life I had shed was behind me, and I would never again let any of them dictate who I should be. Tomorrow, I would deliver the letter. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin in earnest. And when they finally understood what it meant to be hunted, humiliated, and powerless, only then would they glimpse the smallest fraction of what they had tried to do to me. At dawn, I left the boarding house with my hood pulled low and the sealed letter tucked safely against my ribs. The streets were quiet, only a few fishmongers setting up their stalls and a drunk slumped by the fountain. No one paid me any mind.
Perfect.
I made my way to the small courier office 2 streets past the main square. The clerk behind the counter looked up with tired eyes and forced a polite smile. Delivery? Yes. He accepted the letter without comment. He didn't know that parchment would ignite a fire my father couldn't smother. He didn't see the years of quiet rage in every line of my handwriting. But I did. And as I stepped out into the pale morning, I felt lighter than I could ever remember feeling. By mid-afternoon, the winds had shifted. Literally and figuratively. A coastal storm rolled in, sending merchants scrambling to pull their awnings down. Rain lashed the windows of the boarding house as I sat by the fire, warm and dry. Outside, the world dissolved in a blur of gray. Inside, I studied the last of my ledgers. My broker's most recent note lay open across my knees. As of this morning, your holdings stand at 21%. Should you wish to proceed further, additional funds will be necessary. 21%. I smiled. It wasn't just a number. It was a wedge I could drive straight into the Whitmore's gut. Enough influence to call a vote of the board. Enough to challenge any decisions Damien made. He had no idea he was bleeding power with every passing day. That evening, while the rain hammered the roof, I heard voices rise in the front hall. The widow's polite murmur, a stranger's clipped tone. I set my ledger aside and moved silently to the top of the stairs. A tall man stood framed in the doorway, rain dripping off his broad shoulders. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. A neatly trimmed beard. His clothes marked him as someone accustomed to privilege, though his boots were scuffed with travel. His eyes lifted, and for one breathless moment, I thought he was another of Damien's men. But then I saw the signet ring he wore, a crest I didn't recognize. I am looking for a woman who traveled here under the name Elena Morgan, he said calmly. I have business with her. The widow glanced up the staircase, her expression cautious. I met her gaze, and inclined my head. It's all right, I called. I will see him. The man looked up, and something like relief flickered across his face. As I descended, I studied him. He watched me with a composure that didn't feel like malice. If anything, he looked curious. We faced each other in the flickering lamplight. You know who I am, I said. It wasn't a question. I do, he replied. But you needn't worry. I have no interest in returning you to your family. That intrigued me enough to keep listening. And what interest you have? His mouth curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. The same as you, I suspect. Watching them lose everything they believe they own. I led him into the parlor, gestured for him to sit. He introduced himself as Ashford Vale, a name I recalled from whispered rumors in the capital. The Vale family had once been trading rivals of my father's, until they were driven nearly to ruin by a particularly vicious campaign. I imagine, I said slowly, you'd like to see that debt repaid. His eyes gleamed. And I imagine you have no intention of hiding forever. I considered him in the wavering light. He was dangerous. Any man who could appear unannounced in my exile was not to be underestimated. But I was no longer the naive girl who trusted sweet words. I trusted results. What do you propose? He leaned forward, folding his hands.
En alliance.
I have resources. You have leverage. Together, we could dismantle Whitmore shipping in less than a year. His tone was matter-of-fact, not flattering. And that honesty disarmed me more than any practiced charm. I didn't answer at once. Instead, I let the silence stretch, testing his patience. Finally, I said, if I agree, there will be no half measures. I intend to break them. Good, Ashford replied. So, do I. When he left, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. I stood in the doorway a moment longer, breathing the salt-laden air. A month ago, I would never have believed I could speak of revenge so calmly, so assured of my right to it. Now, I felt nothing but certainty. Damien, Clarissa, my father, every one of them had taught me what it meant to be powerless. It was only fair I return the lesson. Weeks passed in a blur of quiet industry. Ashford and I met often, always in private rooms with no windows and no eavesdroppers. He was meticulous in his planning, far more calculating than anyone I had known in my old life. But unlike my father or Damien, his cunning was never turned on me. We were allies, two predators circling the same wounded prey. Each morning, new reports arrived, shipments delayed, creditors withdrawing support, rumors swirling that Whitmore shipping teetered on the brink of insolvency. Each evening, I sat by the fire, marking out the progress in my ledger. Step by step, the life they had built on my subjugation collapsed. The final blow came in the form of an official summons. It was addressed not to me, but to Clarissa. To the Lady Clarissa Whitmore, be advised that the Royal Treasury has initiated an audit of all accounts associated with Whitmore Shipping and Trade. You are required to appear before the Crown's auditors within the fortnight. Ashford placed the document in my hands himself, his mouth curved in that restrained, satisfied way of his. They will never recover from this, he said. I traced the seal with my thumb, imagining the look on Clarissa's face as she read it. The fear that would finally eclipse her smug little smile. It was almost poetic. Days later, a letter arrived by special courier, Damien's handwriting slashing across the page in that same familiar scrawl.
Come home.
We can make this right. I will forgive everything if you return. I read it once, then set it aside without another thought. Forgive everything? As if I was the one who had sinned. As if my only crime had been refusing to stand in their cathedral to be humiliated again. How small they must feel now, watching their empire buckle under the weight of my absence. When I finally returned to the capital, I did so without disguise. No hood, no false name. Only a dark riding cloak and the knowledge that no one could touch me. Ashford rode at my side, silent and steady. He understood better than anyone that this was not a triumphant parade. It was the quiet return of someone who would never again be overlooked. The city watched me pass. People turned to stare, eyes wide. Rumor had given me 1,000 faces. The tragic bride, the spurned heiress, the vengeful ghost. I was none of them. I was simply myself. I did not go to the Whitmore estate. I had no desire to step foot in that mausoleum of deceit. Instead, I met with the board of directors who now control the company in all but name. When I entered the chamber, they fell silent. Lady Whitmore, the chairman stammered, as if unsure whether to greet me or beg forgiveness. I set my ledger on the table. I believe you have received notice of my holdings. 21% had grown to 27 in my absence. Enough that no motion could be passed without my consent. Yes, the chairman said hoarsely. We did not expect. You did not expect me to survive. I finished coolly. And you did not expect me to learn. I let my gaze sweep the table. Old men in fine suits, all of them complicit in my father's crimes. You will sell me your shares, I said. At a fair price, of course. But you will relinquish control. The chairman swallowed. And if we refuse? I leaned forward, smiling faintly. Then I will show the auditors every ledger you thought was buried.
Every bribe.
Every forgery. Silence. One by one, their gazes dropped. We will prepare the contracts, the chairman whispered. I inclined my head. Good. When I stepped back into the corridor, Ashford was waiting. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I felt the old impulse to look away, to soften the edges of my certainty. But I didn't. You did it, he said quietly. No, I corrected. I did exactly what I always could have done, if I had believed I was worthy of more than their scraps. His mouth curved. And now, I said, exhaling, I am free. We walked together out into the morning. The sun was rising over the city rooftops, gilding every spire and cornice in gold. In that light, I felt no sorrow for what I had destroyed. I felt clean. I never saw Damien again. Some claimed he fled the country to escape the inquiry. Others said he married another heiress, trying to salvage his name. I didn't care. Clarissa disappeared into obscurity, her beauty and charm no match for the stench of scandal. My father was last seen leaving the capital in a battered carriage, everything he owned reduced to whatever could be carried away in trunks. It was, I decided, a fitting end. Months later, when the contracts were signed and my holdings secure, I stood on the cliffs above the harbor, the same cliffs I had looked back from the morning I vanished. Ashford came to stand beside me, silent as ever. I thought you might leave, he said after a time. I thought about it, I admitted. And? I turned to face him, feeling the sea wind on my skin, no longer cold but alive. This was never about escape, I said simply. It was about choosing myself. His smile was the first I had ever seen from him, small and genuine. And have you? I looked out over the waves. Yes, I breathed. At last.